So we did this Bible plan in the Bible app, and it's entitled Three Sneaky Sins That May Block Your Salvation. So the first one the first one is adultery, and I think that everybody kind of knows obviously what adultery is, but
Right.
I thought it was interesting that this was included in the sneaky sins because it's like, well, it seems to be very obvious as to what adultery is. But when you read the scripture, you can understand it. It says Matthew 5:27 and 28. When you read the scripture, you can understand why it's in there. That's why it's classified as a sneaky sin, if you will. It says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And yeah, that's a real one. That's a real one there. Because how women are. A lot of times you guys struggle.
How are they?
Y'all struggle.
How are they?
Sometimes women struggle with how y'all look at men and lust after us. And so as I know, it must be difficult for you guys being visual creatures. And so that was interesting to me because it says if you look lustfully at a woman, and obviously it goes for you guys too. If you look lustfully at a man, and sometimes you have to really be mindful about that because it can sneak up on you. You can see somebody and not have any intentions on it, literally committing fornication, having sexual relationships with them. But if you allow your mind to go there, then according to the word, you've already committed adultery in your heart.
Right. And then I feel like you really have to check yourself and watch yourself because I've heard just growing up in a barbershop, ain't nothing wrong with looking as long as I'm not acting on it. But the word says it is something wrong with looking. So I think it's one of those sins. That's why it's sneaky because you feel like just because I'm not acting on it, I'm not doing nothing wrong. But you've already planted that seed in your head, and the mind is a very tricky thing because it might be something we forgot about, but subconsciously, it could still be replaying in the back of our mind. So I think it's definitely sneaky. Definitely.
And I think it's sneaky because as you quoted, obviously, people say nothing wrong with looking. There is nothing wrong with looking and admiring someone's beauty, if you will. But when it goes to the point of desiring it or having thoughts that aren't holy, if you will, then you start saying, okay, now you're sneaking into lust. Now you're getting into adultery. And I think that's where it's sneaky because it's nothing wrong with you saying, man, that's a, not me, but for you to say that's a nice looking man. I mean, I'm not the only nice looking man in the world. I'm one of few. Me and Denzel and maybe Billy D. Williams. But the fact of the matter is, you aren't the only beautiful woman in the world. But at the end of the day, there has to be a way you deal with that, the way you see beauty and not letting it go beyond the way you appreciate beauty, I should say, and not letting it go beyond that. And I think that's where the sneakiness of it is, and the danger.
Right.
All right. The second one was covetousness. Do you want to address that one?
Yeah. So the scripture says you should not covet your neighbor's house. You should not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And that's in Exodus 20 and 17. So in that, God makes it very clear that we should not desire anything that someone else has.
Yeah, and it's, again, I think it's in here because it's a sneaky, it can sneak up on you because there's, again, and even as you say, like desiring, it's one thing to appreciate, like the fact that, your neighbor has a nice house or, here talking about ox and donkeys. Obviously that's symbolic nowadays. That's just things, it could be cars, it could be jewelry. to appreciate, to see that, to be thankful for somebody else that has those things, and to use those things to motivate you to acquire your own, or to inspire you to continue to achieve greatness is fine. But when you start again taking it beyond just admiration, and now it's more about, well, I want it for myself, I think that is where you get into the again, that fine line. All of these sins are about, there's a fine line that you can cross over into. And in particular, you can cross over it while you are observing or admiring something that is in fact good. Someone's physical attributes, which are attractive, there's nothing wrong with, like, God bless that person with that. God bless us, presumably, we don't know what somebody did to get what they got, but presuming they did everything on the up and up, and they have nice cars or houses or whatever, like, you admiring that is nothing wrong with that. It's just being careful how that admiration can get into covetousness.
Right.
I think it is a. I think taking shortcuts is a. I don't know if I call it a symptom or if it's I don't know how you put it, but I'm for lack of a better term, I say it's a symptom of covetousness. Like when you start coveting things, now you're like, I want it, whatever I gotta do to get it.
Right.
And I think that's one of the dangerous things about covetousness, because when you say, man, LeBron, dude, that dude fit, man. Like, I'm finna get in the gym, man. I'm finna go get it, right? That's you admiring him. When you like, man, like LeBron fit, like, bro, I just gotta have it. Like, and then you start getting to like, man, I'm not trying to necessarily go to the gym. I'll go, but it ain't really happening quick enough. So let me just take these steroids. Let me start doing things that are now destructive. And I think that's when, you start. And it's kind of interesting we talk about this. It takes me back to the first sneaky sin of adultery. So Kelly and I are out, and some nice looking lady walks by, and I'm just like, okay, I see her, and it's like, okay, blah blah blah. That's fine. Where it becomes an issue is because now if I start like lusting after her, now I'm going to start taking shortcuts and trying to find ways to still look at this lady without having her catch me. So now I'm doing other things to accomplish the sin. Now I'm putting on shades just so I can get a good look, because she can't see my eyes. I'm in the example you give, I'm taking the steroids. I'm not doing the things that are necessary, that are helpful for me. And I think that's good, because it leads us to this. The third sin is the third sin on here is idolatry. And I think it's really important, as this is a sneaky sin, especially in light of all of the exposure we have to what everybody has now with social media. There was a point in time when nobody really knew what anybody had, unless you literally went there and saw them. Now, we all know what celebrities have. We can see their house, we can see their cars, we can see what people have. And I think when you start talking about that, you start worshiping it. And the scripture here is Exodus 20 verse 3, which says, "You shall have no other gods before me." And again, it's little g, not big God, little gods. And idolatry could be anything. I mean, it could be. It can actually be something that's not a bad thing. It could be your kids. You're putting your kids on a pedestal before God. It could be your spouse. Mm-hmm. The thing that is the idol doesn't necessarily have to be a negative person or a negative thing or a bad thing, but your disposition toward it is where the idolatry comes. How you treat that thing relative to how you treat God. The regard in which you hold your spouse, your job, your position, your status, relative to how you regard God, is where you start getting into idolatry. And that's a very I understand why it's a sneaky sin. A lot of people think of idolatry which is like to literally worship a thing, like to create a fake God and be praying to it. Like, yeah, we get it. That's idolatry too, but What are your thoughts on that?
Even just going back like to the shortcuts. We're currently, so this is a plan that we did maybe a couple weeks ago, but our current plan is we're talking about is David Ramsey, and we're talking about money. And I just remember scripture where it talks about shortcuts, and it's just a reminder like this slow and steady wins the race. So whenever you talk about shortcuts, you really have to be very cautious of that, because it's like, why, what is the purpose of, one, what is the purpose of me even wanting this? Two, why do I feel like I have to take a shortcut to get it? And the scripture is Proverbs 21:5, and I'm reading the New Living Testament, and it's good planning and hard work leads to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts leads to poverty. So I just think, it is what it is. The shortcuts, it's just like a quick fix. Just like, anything else is going to have consequences to it. But good planning and hard work is prosperity. And not even just, because we are discussing money right now, but not even just money. I feel like that's with anything whenever it comes to prosperity. And as far as the idols, that's something that you really have to be very cautious of, because like you said, anybody can just create like an image or a fixture or something and call it a god, but it's whatever we put before God. Like, what are we really worshiping? What is it that's taking our time and our mind and our focus away from God, that we're putting before God? So that's something that you really have to be cautious about, because you might be doing it and not even have the intentions on doing it. It's really sneaky. So that's when you really have to check yourself about, like, hey, I haven't been to church. Instead I've got comfortable off of since COVID, and I've been listening to it. And while I'm doing this, while I'm listening to it, I'm really not focusing on God. I'm driving down 35 doing so much other stuff. So it's like, what are you putting before God that not necessarily that you're worshiping, but you're replacing God with something? So I think that's really something that we have to be cautious about.
Yeah, I think, like you say, being cautious about it, you have to be intentional about what is it that you are doing with your time. Because at the end of the day, if we're all assessing and trying to be cautious, you say, well, how do I know if I'm dabbling in idolatry? Well, you have to start looking, like literally look at how you spend your time. Look at what are you doing on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. How much time are you giving to God? Are you setting aside time for God? If not, then you're setting aside time for something else.
Right.
Like as you mentioned, like what are you doing on Sunday? Like are you taking the time to get up and go to church? Are you taking the time to pray with your spouse, with your kids? How important is that time? And so you look at it, you look at your bank account. You can figure out, like, man, where am I spending my money? Like what am I actually spending my resources on? Beyond, your obviously necessities, but what else am I spending my time and money on? I think those are some of the things you can do to try to self-check, to self-assess, to see, if I've created another thing or passion or hobby. Like I said, it doesn't always have to be some tangible thing that you pray to. It could be something that you are spending your time. Very fine line. It's especially you talk about it as an athlete. As a man, you hear, and I'm speaking as a man and as an athlete, a former athlete. You hear all of this, as you alluded to, mamba mentality. Like you gotta obsess over it. It's gotta become your obsession. And man, you're like, oh, like I get it, and I have to check myself sometimes, because I mentor young kids, and we talk about the game and the passion and what they want to do, and I know I'm probably guilty of saying, like, man, you gotta obsess over it. If you want to get a college, you gotta obsess over it. If you want to play ball, like, you can't be treating it as a hobby. It's gotta be your everything. And
when you rest in somebody else's work,
yeah, you say that stuff, and you're like, yeah, and then you have to remember what the word says, and I'm paraphrasing the scripture, but it says that the steps that are ordered by God bring no strife. Like when you are doing what God called you to do, like it doesn't necessarily mean there won't be challenges, but the conflict, if you will, isn't there. It isn't as prominent as when you're trying to do it in your own strength. And I think that's where it comes back to being a sneaky sin, because you're always trying to balance. You're balancing, like, is there anything, like she read in the scripture, there's nothing wrong with working hard, being diligent. The Bible tells us to be diligent. But then it's like, but when you start allowing that work toward that goal to take you away from doing what God, spending time with God, doing those things, then now it's like, well, hold on. Now you say, hey, it don't take all that. You know, having a spouse that is also grounded in the word helps with idolatry. It helps with having someone that keeps you focused on the main thing, which are not the things.
Right.
You know, if I know men who have women who have wives that are always pushing them to acquire more. And the guy, in whatever it is, either love or I don't know what it is, but he's now breaking his back to try to make his wife happy by getting more. And at the same time, his pursuit of getting more is taking him away from pursuit of God.
Right.
And I think that's something that I can honestly say that I'm very, very grateful to have a wife like Kelli. She doesn't, the whole time we've been together, she's never like necessarily pushed me to go acquire a thing, like a tangible material thing. That's just not who she is. She's pushed me toward my calling. She's, you know, held me accountable toward getting things done, but not for the purpose of just acquiring things like that. And I think that is very important because, again, that idolatry sneaks up. Like you said, you working hard, you're doing all this other stuff, and next thing you know, man, you're not doing anything that you need to do. Now, you're not spending time with your wife. Now it's because you're trying to pursue the thing. And then, she's upset. And now it's just, you can't win for losing.
Right.